Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Rabia Sajad from Anatomy Department, Sahara Medical College, and today is the last part of General Anatomy of Muscle. We are going to discuss classification of skeletal muscles, and this is the most important section as per the point of view of examination. So there are different categories through which skeletal muscles are classified. For example, we have 4 categories here. According to color, the skeletal muscles can be classified as red, white, and sometimes intermediate category is also included. Then we have a classification according to the architecture of fibers or the direction of fibers, which we will discuss further on. And then we have regional classification, that is just the skeletal muscle associated with upper limb, head and neck, lower limb, or thorax and abdomen. Then we have according to action, there are different categories like prime movers, synergists, fixators, antagonists. So we will discuss them in details in the coming slides. In lower vertebrates, the red and white fibers are exclusively present in individual muscles. So we can classify skeletal muscle into a whole red skeletal muscle and a white skeletal muscle. But in humans, as these two types of muscle fibers are mixed up in different proportions, so we classify the human skeletal muscle according to the concentration of red and white skeletal muscle cells. The muscles which have more red fibers than the white fibers are known as red skeletal muscles, and those which have more white fibers as compared to red are known as the white skeletal muscles. The reddish category are called so because they have high quantity of myoglobin protein, which is responsible for storage of oxygen at muscular level, and it is similar in structure to hemoglobin protein. The amount of mitochondria is also more than the white fibers. The Z lines are thicker, and the contraction is slow and prolonged type. These fibers are also known as postural muscle fibers, and these muscles are also known as slow twitch muscles. And because of the high percentage of myoglobin and mitochondria, these muscles are not easily fatigued. A very good example recently studied in lower limb is soleus muscle in the calf group, which has more concentration of these red fibers, and that muscle is responsible for the initiation of plantar flexion against gravity, and it is known as the first gear muscle. While discussing the white skeletal muscles, they have high proportion of the white muscle cells, and white muscle cells have decreased quantity of myoglobin, so they look pale, and they have a low quantity of mitochondria as compared to red fibers. Their Z lines are also thinner as compared to red fibers, and the contraction is rapid and unsustained. So that means they are easily fatigued. They are fast twitch fibers for quick responses and rapid movements. For example, in the plantar flexors, the gastrocnemius muscle has more quantity of these pale fibers, and it is responsible for the speeding up of the movement as compared to soleus. So gastrocnemius is known as the second, third gear muscle of lower limb. According to the architecture of muscle fascicles, the skeletal muscles are roughly divided into 2 main categories. The one with the parallelly arranged muscle fibers, and the one with oblique arrangement of muscle fiber as compared to the line of pull of muscles. So we can see these different categories: fusiform types, parallel types, pipinate muscles, triangular muscles, sphincter-like muscles, which are also known as circular muscles. So we're going to discuss them in detail in the coming slides. The first category is the skeletal muscles with the parallel arrangement of muscle fibers, and the line of pull is parallel to the arrangement of muscle cells. Now they have maximum range of mobility as the muscles can contract and shorten and produce too much movement, but they are also comparatively less powerful muscles. These muscles are further divided into following categories. First are the quadrilateral muscles. They are arranged in a parallel manner, producing a quadrangular shape of the muscle. Examples include thyroid in head and neck and quadratus femoris in lower limb. Then the second category is strap-like muscles, which have length way more than the width of the muscle, and they are also called ribbon-like muscles. And the line of pull is parallel to the arrangement of muscle fibers. Example is sartorius in lower limb, sternothyroid in head and neck. This third category can also be included in the same group of strap-like muscle, but it has tendinous intersections which interrupt and divide the muscle into multiple bellies. Then the next category are the fusiform muscle, which have parallel arrangement of muscle as compared to the line of pull, almost parallel. They converge on both ends, giving the spindle shape or fusiform appearance, with proximal and distal attachment, which is usually tendinous. For example, bicep brachii, tricep brachii in upper limb, digastric in head and neck. The fusiform muscles are again subdivided into one-headed muscles, two-headed muscles, which are biceps, three-headed muscles, which are triceps. Then they have one belly, and they can have two bellies or multiple bellies. The two bellies muscle is the digastric, as we have discussed. The origin of two bellies is separate, but in the middle they insert on a common tendon which hooks around some bony structure. Then the multiple bellies muscle is the rectus abdominis, which can again be categorized in this group because of the fusiform shape of the multiple bellies. The rest of the muscles given in your book are more or less included in the muscles with fibers oblique to the line of pull. For example, we have the categories of triangular muscles, fan-shaped muscles, pinnate muscles, spiral muscles, cruciate muscles, and circular muscles. So, talking about the triangular muscles, the origin is broader and the insertion point tapers off, so giving the muscle a triangular shape. For example, pectoralis major in upper limb and adductor magnus in lower limb. Then fan-shaped muscles are more or less similar to the triangular muscles, and they resemble the hand fan. Muscles included are gluteus medius minimus and lower limb, and temporalis muscle in head and neck. Pipinate or peniform muscles are those which appear to have feather-like pattern. The muscle cells are grouped in bundles or fascicles that are lying at an angle with the long axis of the muscle. So they are responsible for producing contraction with power. So they are further divided into four categories. The half feather-like muscle are known as unipinnate or semipinnate muscles, and we have bipinnate, a complete feather. Multiple bipinnate fascicles arranged together makes a multipinnate muscle, and circumponent muscle have fibers coming from all directions. So circumponent muscles are also grouped as a different category known as radiate muscle in your book. In the unipennate muscle, the appearance is half feather-like, and in this muscle, the tendon is parallel to the line of pull, while the muscle fibers or fascicles are attached obliquely to one side of the tendon. The examples include flexor pollicis longus in upper limb, extensor digitorum longus, peroneus tertium in lower limb. We also include the small muscles palmar interossei and some of the lumbrical as unipennate muscle. For example, the first lumbrical in the lower limb is the unipennate muscle. Then in bipennate muscle, the tendon is centrally placed and the muscle fibers or fascicles are converging from both sides onto the muscle tendon. The examples include rectus femoris, part of quadriceps femoris, and then we have dorsal interossei, which are bipennate muscles. The peroneus longus, flexor hallucis longus are examples of bipennate muscles. Multipennate muscles include many pinnate masses which are attached to a common attachment, and these muscles have low range of movement but coupled with considerable power. So examples include deltoid and subscapularis in upper limb. In circumpennate or radiate muscle, the fibers are coming from all direction on the centrally lying tendon. The example includes tibialis anterior muscle of the lower limb. There can be a different category for muscles who have twisted fascicles. The first subcategory is the spiralized or spiral muscles. In these muscles, the muscle fascicle twist around or spiral around their own axis or along another muscle. We have already studied this twisting in the axilla, where anterior and posterior axillary fold are made by the spiraling fibers of pectoralis major anteriorly around its own axis, and then the latissimus dorsi fiber spiraling posteriorly on the lower border of teres major. Then the supinator muscle and the ascending fibers or the lower fibers of trapezius are also twisting or spiraling before their insertion. Cruciate muscles are also those muscles in which the fibers change direction such that the muscle fascicles make a cross appearance. So examples include sternocleidomastoid that we have studied with the upper limb, and masseter muscle here shown in the jaw. Adductor magnus is also included in this category. Circular muscles can also be considered as muscles having oblique fibers as compared to the line of pull. These muscle cells are making a circle around an opening, and they are responsible for the opening and closing of those apertures. For example, around mouth we have orbicularis oris, and around the eyes we have orbicularis oculi. So all these categories have different functions. For example, muscle with parallel arrangement, they are more helpful in lifting weight for a long distance. And the muscle who have oblique arrangement, they are responsible for powerful actions. For example, the deltoid muscle with short range of movement and more power produced at the shoulder joint. Then we have spiralized and cruciate forms, which may help in some rotatory movements. Strap-like muscles, they cross more than one joint, so they have action on two distant joints. Then this is not a very important classification. Muscles which are crossing one joint are known as one joint muscle. So they exclusively act on one muscle. Then we have two joint muscles or multiple joint muscles. For example, rectus femoris in lower limb crosses two joints, sartorius crosses two joints. Then the long digit muscles, flexor digitorum longus, extensor digitorum, they cross many joints. The main action is on the joint which is closer to the insertion, but they act as synergist or accessory muscles for the other joints. And the physiological classification of muscle or functional classification includes these four categories. The prime movers or agonists are those muscles which are responsible for initiation and maintenance of a particular movement, and these are the main muscle of a movement. For example, brachialis is a prime mover in a flexion of elbow joint. Medial head of tricep brachii is a prime mover for extension at elbow joint. Then we have antagonist muscles or opponents, which produce movements opposite to the prime mover. For example, considering the same example, brachialis and biceps are antagonist for extension at elbow joint, and tricep brachii is antagonist for flexion at elbow joint. Fixator are usually those muscles which are responsible for fixing the proximal attachment of a muscle or fixing a joint or part of an articular surface so that the movement is augmented. For example, when the deltoid muscle is contracting and producing abduction of shoulder joint up to 90 degree, the rotator cuff muscles are there to stabilize the head of humerus in the glenoid cavity. Similarly, the muscles which are acting on shoulder and elbow joint, they fix those joints for the movement of pronation and supination used in twisting and screwing movements. So synergists are those muscles which help the prime mover by either acting as an accessory muscle or acting as partial antagonist at joints which the prime mover is crossing before it is inserted close to the main joint. So these, for example, at wrist we have the maximum action of the long flexors of digit when the wrist is extended. This is because the contraction of long flexors will be used completely for flexing the digits and not for flexing the wrist joint. So the extensors of wrist joint are acting as synergists for the long flexors of the digits. Generally, the skeletal muscles are considered to be involuntary control, but we also know that skeletal muscle are also involved in reflexive activity in which they contract automatically. For example, we have already studied the cough reflex, which is a reflexive contraction, and then we know the knee jerk, which is a reflexive contraction. Then we have tonic contractions, which are simply called muscle tones, the constant tension produced by muscles for a long period of time. And normally in a healthy person, the joints in neutral positions and the posture maintaining joints have muscles with opposite tones maintaining them. Then we have the contraction in which the skeletal muscle are intentionally contracted. There are two types. First is the isotonic contraction, in which the muscle produces movement by contracting, and the tone is increased from the basal tone according to the degree of movement. Then we have isometric contractions, which are basically rise in the muscle tension without production of any movement, which are especially important in postural muscles when they are maintaining the upright position. In the diagram, we can also observe the isometric contraction, where a tone of a muscle is maintained without movement. And then we have isotonic contraction, which is of two types. One is the concentric contraction, the usual normal contraction of muscle in which the muscle shortens and produces movement. Then there is eccentric contraction, in which a contracted or tonic muscle is relaxing its fibers very gradually to produce a coordinated opposite movement. Usually it is an antagonist which is producing the eccentric contraction, and the agonist is producing the concentric contraction. Then we have the classification of muscle according to the orientation of line of pull in relation to the joint, or just the simple movements they are producing. If the line of pull passes anterior to the joint, then it is called flexor, and it is usually bending the bones, decreasing the angle between them. And we have extensors, which are posterior to the line of pull passing through the joint axis. And then we have abductors lateral to the line of pull, and we have adductors medial to the line of pull. The lubricative mechanism associated with the skeletal muscles and their tendons are synovial bursa, which may be extension of synovial cavity, or communicative bursa. They are present between the muscle, tendon, and the bony parts close to the joint. And also separate bursa are present between the muscles and tendons. They are also lying close to the joint but not in communication. Then when the muscle tendons are passing under cover of a fibrous sheath, for example, the fibrous sheath present in the digits, we have already studied in upper limb and lower limb also. The muscle tendons are surrounded by, or better to say that they are invaginating a sac, synovial sac, which is called synovial sheath here. And the two layers of the sheath that contains synovial fluid, and there is this part where the tendon has invaginated. This part is known as mesotendon, and through this part the blood vessels are also going to enter here to supply the tendon. So these lubricating mechanisms are there to reduce the friction between the moving parts. With this, we end the general anatomy of muscles. Thank you.